Hey, this is Jeff with a program note up top to let you know that 1. There was a problem with my main recording, most likely caused by user error, so I'm sharing the backup audio of our panel. It's still a great conversation, even if it's not as crisp as I'd prefer. This is your reminder, always have a backup. And 2, there are live links for all the projects we talk about. Please see the show notes and check out the Monster Gunslingers sign-up page, Grindhouse Season 3, Fright Fights, and Strange Stories the Role-Playing Games page on BackerKit. These are all amazing projects, and I urge you all to support them. On to the show.
This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite folklore, and share original spooky stories. I'm Jeff C. Carter, and I'll be moderating today's panel. Our topic, horror fiction as games. I'm not going to introduce everyone because that will take too long, and I want you to become familiar with our guest voices. So going clockwise on my screen, I'm going to start with Casey Grifant.
Hi, everyone. I am Casey Grifant. I am an author, editor, and writing instructor. I have a few books out, most notably the Monster Gunslinger series, which is like Western horror adventure. I also have a bunch of short stories out in magazines, games, podcasts, working on some games. I teach some fiction classes, and I'm also the founder of the Horror Writers Association San Diego chapter.
And we're going to slide from the West Coast to the East Coast. Emma?
So I'm Emma E. Murray. You might know my novels, Crushing Snails, or Shoot Me in the Face on a Beautiful Day, or my collection, The Drowning Machine and Other Obsessions. And I have another novel about a family annihilator coming out next year from Ghoulish called Decay Chain that you can pre-order now. And I just play games.
Without the fans and the people who play games, none of this would be possible. John, good morning.
Hi, I'm John Cohn. I'm a horror novelist and a professional board game designer. I've got about 25-ish games that have been released over the last 10 years or so, ranging from, licensed stuff like Horror Taboo to much smaller things. Grindhouse is a horror narrative party game that sort of takes both the horror novel part of me and the board game part of me together. I've also worked on stuff like the Thanksgiving game I co-designed with Eli Roth, Ghostbusters Blackout, Black Christmas, a lot of games with the name Black in them. And then I've got some pretty fun games coming out called Fright Fights pretty soon that are in Halloween, Terrifier, Creepshow, Night of the Living Dead, and House of a Thousand Corpses, which are all cross-compatible. So you can have your Michael Myers versus zombies. It's pretty fun.
I love that.
Awesome.
And then we're just going to dash across the pond. Chris, tell the people about yourself.
I'm Chris Lackey. I am the co-host of the Strange Studies of Strange Stories podcast, formerly the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast. We've been going for 17 years now. We cover lots of older fiction, late 19th century, early 20th century stuff. I am currently getting ready to release a tabletop role-playing game called Strange Stories, the role-playing game, which is an offshoot from our podcast. It will be a rules light, one-night affair, and we're very excited about it. It's in pre-launch right now.
Fantastic. So let's open it up with an icebreaker question, and I think John will probably have a good insight into this. What is the worst possible game to get Jumanji'd into?
I think Betrayal at the House on the Hill is a pretty terrible game to get Jumanji'd into because no matter what you do, somebody is always going to turn against everyone else. No matter what your best intentions are going into that game, it's going to end in a bad time for at least one of you. So I can't think of many other games where it's 100% guaranteed that somebody's going to be crushed.
I mean, Werewolf, maybe.
Yeah, that's true.
I have got to go with Monopoly to be stuck in that game. Oh my gosh, it's bad enough to play it, like the kind of popular corporate version, but to be stuck in it, it's like our own reality, right?
I
Capitalism.
mean, aren't we just living in
Aren't we all?
Monopoly
Yeah,
right
we're all
now?
stuck in it. That's our. If tabletop role-playing games are on the list, I would say Call of Cthulhu would be pretty hellish to be stuck into.
Again, aren't we living inside Call of Cthulhu? Call of Cthulhu to some extent.
Well, as far as I know, there aren't any books that I could read that would drive me insane.
You haven't
That's
As
read
what I
far
was
any
as
of
I
those
going to
books,
say
I
too.
guess.
It's
Yeah, we
called
knew.
Cthulhu. Because yeah, I definitely wouldn't want to be in there. Like, no, thank you.
Candyland for me. You know, it's only a
Candyland.
matter of time before Candyland gets completely overrun by ants and bees and wasps, and you would just be living in this hellscape where you'd be like fighting off diabetes on the one hand and attacked by wasps at all hours on the other.
And it sounds sticky. That's not
Oh, it's
pleasant.
the stickiest of all possible worlds.
But you could be with Queen Faustine.
Yes.
My
And-
dream since I was a child.
You could amputate each other's feet as the diabetes took you.
Yeah, there's a horror story. Yeah.
So, on that note, Casey, you were the person that helped inspire this panel because you have some horror fiction that is being adapted into a game system. So, can you walk us through your Monster Gunslinger series, so we get a little bit of table setting, as it were, and then how did that touch the world of gaming?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because growing up and just throughout my life, I didn't really care for Westerns or the Western genre, which I know is sacrilege to a lot of Western readers, but it's because the women characters in them were always terrible, right? They were the love interest, prostitute with a heart of gold, or like the farm girl next door. Was never really into Westerns at all. And then when I moved to San Diego, I started playing a game called Doomtown, which is a kind of a Weird West based on the Deadlands universe. And I was really entranced because the characters on the cards were very diverse. There were a ton of women lawmakers and outlaws and gunslingers, and I had never really seen that before in the Western setting. So I became really enchanted with the game. It's a really fun game to play, pretty in depth, and I won some local tournaments. I got involved with the community, and then I started writing official stories for the game. And I really liked that. I liked it so much that I spun off and did my own Weird West universe, where I really wanted women characters to be at the forefront. So the main character is Melinda West, and she is a stoic gunslinger, right? So kind of gender swapped of the typical like stoic gunslinger that you see in movies. She was very well received in short stories. So I wrote novels. I've written 2, and I'm working on the 3rd. And at the same time, my husband, Jason Liu, had designed a card game, and he based it on poker. He's been a longtime poker fan, and he plays Doomtown. He used to play Magic the Gathering professionally, so very immersed in like game mechanics, right? So he designed this really cool take on Texas Hold'em, and he had it sort of sitting on a shelf. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we combine forces, right, and give that game some flavor? And I was between books, so I wanted to do something to kind of bring the universe alive. So I found this fabulous artist, Jenny Chin, in Canada, who was interested in doing the art for the cards. So we worked with her, and the idea was we were going to maybe like self-publish it. We didn't really know how to do that. So we had the cards already, the game already, and then John was super awesome in advising us and connected us with a local publisher here called Red 23, who we partnered with to bring the game to fruition, right? We didn't know anything about manufacturing and distribution. So Red 23 has been a great partner in that, and the game is about to come out like within a few weeks. So we're super excited. It's been a long journey, but we can't wait to get this game out in the world.
That is so cool. Emma, you are a longtime D&D player. Were
Yeah.
you a gamer first and then you got into writing fiction, or was it the other way around?
Well, I've been writing fiction since I was a little kid. You know, like I wrote my first like horror story when I was like 6 years old, and I still have it. But I mean, I got into D&D a long time ago, so both of them have been like lifelong pursuits.
Do you feel like creating characters for D&D, or when you have strayed outside of D&D into these horror games, has that influenced your fiction writing at all, or do you just keep them separate?
I think it does influence my writing just because I write a lot of very character driven things. And so that's always what I'm most concerned about. And so I am that player that makes 20 pages of lore for the DM to have to read, like about my background and everything. And so I think that they just go together, and I can't help but also fall in love with some of those characters I've made. And so they will kind of morph into characters in fiction eventually.
Nice. John, I have worked with some small press game publishers, and it seems like there's a lot of love in it, a lot of sacrifice. It's sort of brutal, thankless. And sometimes it seems like it takes years for these things to come out. And more often, those years have not arrived. It's like an infinite horizon. Oh, next year, next year, next year. And we're still waiting. How is it that you've been able to move through so many separate games from inception to completion, or should I say conception to completion?
Yeah, that's a great question. The board game industry, with the exception of 4 publishers, is run purely on passion. It's people who are generally not business background. It's people who love games, love making games, and just want to see the things that they love and the experiences they love to share with their friends become available for other people to experience as well. And the answer is that it's kind of like throwing spaghetti at a wall. I've got something like 25 games out now, but I've had, I don't know, probably 70 games I've made in total. I've had companies, big companies that I'm legally not allowed to mention, that I've made games for, and we've gotten all the way to, days before the crowdfunding would open. And then all of a sudden they ghost me. And you're like, oh, okay. It's happened many times. The one story that I can tell, I had made a murder mystery game in the Batman universe, and we had gotten DC greenlit it. It was all Batman villains, and they were trying to get the Joker. He had Batman's identity in a box, and he was going to give it to the highest bidder. And what do you know? The Joker gets murdered. And it was a game for up to 30 people. And we had done play tests, and we were one play test away from moving on to launching the game. But that play test happened in March of 2020. And days later, the world shut down for COVID. And they said, we can't release a game where you have 30 people in a room together. And so they ended up getting spooked, and it never came to pass. But, things like that can happen, or things on a much smaller scale can happen where games don't happen. But yeah, on the positive end, it's purely based on passion. People who want to see these things happen will make it happen, whether they make money or not.
So that murder mystery, that whole project flies in the face of WWJD. What would Joker do? Joker would put 30 people together in a room during COVID. That's like the most Joker-ass thing you could do. Chris, you worked on Cults of Cthulhu.
I did, yeah, from Chaosium. I was Mike Mason asked me, because I was doing the show, and I've written adventures for Cult of Cthulhu, so I'm in a couple of the books, and then he said, hey, I got this idea. I want to do a whole book about cults, because we don't really talk much about cults. And I said, yeah, that sounds great. And I wrote up a bunch of things based on the research that I did on what Lovecraft actually talked about in his books, and then real cults, and then sort of mix things up and made it so that you can make your own cults. So there's a bunch of charts and things to roll if you want to randomize it, but if you don't want to do that, it's good for just getting ideas for cults. And there's 3 adventures in there, and yeah, I was super psyched to do it, and it was lots of fun, and I think it turned out well. It turned out really well. We got a gold Emmy for it.
So being on the inside like that, sort of seeing the whole thing from beginning to end, did that give you the idea that like, hey, I think we can do this ourselves?
Yeah, definitely. Well, there's a certain way that I like to play games, and especially since I'm getting older, that I have less time that I want to devote into learning a rule system. So I wanted a rules-light game, but also there are lots of people in my life that I want to get into games. And if you look at a Dungeons and Dragons character sheet, I've run into this a few times. I play D&D. I hate D&D, but I still play it. I still play it. I play it a lot, and I
Emma
teach
just
people how to
fainted.
play it. But it's so insanely complicated that if you give somebody the D&D character sheet that's never played a role-playing game before, they're like, what the hell is this? This doesn't. And then start explaining it. I've done this. I'm sure everybody is. Just start slowly explaining what it is, and you can see their eyes glaze over. There's a certain type of person that is up for D&D, and that's not most people. So I was like, but role-playing games are fun. You get to pretend to be a character, you get to tell a story, you get to hang out with your. That's another thing is we don't have enough activities to do with people. So for me, I don't like just going out to dinner or just having some friends over for a drink or whatever, because it gets boring. We talk about the same stuff over and over again. You have to have an activity. And I think role-playing games are like one of the best activities you could do, hanging out with people, second only to karaoke. And that you get those people in and you get to really learn about your friends, because you're kind of having the shared experience of going through these stories together. So with that in mind, and then with the type of stories that I like, because of, we do a podcast about that, science fiction, horror, fantasy stories, but we want to keep it real tight, real short. So we run a session in 2 hours. That's the optimum for the Strange Stories game. It's in and out, pre-gen characters. So the characters are custom made for the story that you're going to tell. And that makes it really easy. So in 5 minutes, people are playing. They pick a character and they're already in there. You throw them into a situation where they've just got to make decisions. They're making choices. And that's the stuff that's real. So of all my years of playing games, even Call of Cthulhu, which I love, that's another character sheet. You hand that over. It's crazy. Like, what are you supposed to do with this? And I wanted to make something that's accessible. There's a lot of rules light games out there, but I feel like that this one, hopefully, we'll see, is the type of game that will bring people into the hobby, especially people that are fans of the genres.
Fantastic. I can't wait to see more. Casey, Chris was talking about pre-gen characters. Before we started rolling, you had, we were sort of sussing out the difference between horror video games, which is its own genre, its own podcast topic, and this, card games, tabletop games. What do you think is the difference? Obviously, aside from the mode of interaction, video games use a controller or a keyboard. What makes horror tabletop games or horror card games different from video games?
So I do play some video games as well online with my family. We do it like once a week, and it's social and fun, but it's not social in the same way that face-to-face games are. So those I really feel like are more of, a party setting. Like you're really with your friends, you're all focused on this one activity. Like when I'm playing video games, sometimes we're all silent because we're just shooting bad guys, right? We're not like necessarily conversing, versus, for example, Blood on the Clock Tower, which we play a lot of. John plays with us as well.
It's the best part of my life.
For those who haven't played, it's like social deduction, murder mystery. There's a lot of bluffing. It's very intense. It's an awesome game, not for everyone, but it is very social and fun. And we make it sort of like a party, right? So I do think that face-to-face interaction is so valuable. And then when you add the layer of horror on it, right? Horror is engaging in a way that other genres aren't always, because it's tapping into your kind of primal emotions, right? Fear, disgust, terror. And it's fun to do that with friends, right? It's like being around the campfire and telling scary stories. It is bonding. It can be cathartic. It can be hilarious, right? So I think horror games in person, tabletop face-to-face is unique, I think, in a way that other games are not. And highly recommend everybody try it at least once, right?
That is a good answer. I was thinking more about like player agency and character creation and things like that, which I would also love to explore. But Emma, as a long-time D&D player and a horror writer, you've probably noticed that D&D can kind of struggle with horror because sometimes the stakes are really low, or it's more fantastical than gothic or grim. And there's things like Curse of Strahd, where you can flavor things as horror. But as a board game playing degenerate, what are some of these like indie niche horror games that you play, and what is the difference you see between like a good solid horror game and D&D?
I mean, so I think with horror games, yeah, I mean, a lot of it has to do with kind of the writing, honestly, and the storytelling. I think that is the most important thing, because yeah, D&D is more of a fantasy game. It is. I have DM'd some like mini campaigns that were very horrific, but were they really classically D&D? Probably not. Like they were very, very much like homebrewed stuff. And so I think it is just a different vibe overall, that like you have to, find these niche cool games that really are by horror lovers, because I don't think that the people who are really drawn to like D&D are people who are going to want to really get into that dread, and versus just kind of like cool monster design, which is also fun and everything, but it's not really horror, versus the dread, just the disturbing nature of horror, where you really feel on edge, which is hard to achieve, I think, and really needs, someone who is a horror mastermind.
Ooh, I'd like to piggyback off that as well, if I can.
Please.
I think that you're touching on a really great topic, which is that there are different types of tension. In D&D, you're largely dealing with a power fantasy. You have a lot that you can bring into the world to shape that world, to shape the experiences you're in. You have power. Even if you get, killed or, taken down, there are ways that other people can bring you back, because everyone is very powerful. When you have a horror-centric campaign, like a Call of Cthulhu type of thing, you're inherently not powerful people. So it creates a different kind of tension where if, one wrong step can spell the end of your character. And when you are building a character and you're creating something, you're putting a piece of yourself into that character. And when they die, that part of you dies with it. And again, in D&D, there are ways to bring characters back. If you've been playing as a character for 5 years and they die, there's generally a way for them to come back. In Call of Cthulhu, that's not the case. And so you feel like you have some real stakes on the line if a character that you've fallen in love with sees an untimely demise.
That is such a great point. I agree, because like that is what really makes horror different, is that there isn't the power, like you said, like you is out of your hands, and that is what is scary, especially about cosmic horror like Cthulhu.
So there's that tension of how much time you've invested with the character, and then you've got a one shot where it's like anyone could die, anything's on the table, and then you have something like a pre-gen character where you're like, we're off to the races within 5 minutes. Is there a tension ludically in terms of balancing how quickly a game gets on track versus how much time you have to customize or invest in a character? Because if you don't care about these characters, if it's just a pip you're moving across the board, and all right, sure, I'll check out that trap, I'll go down that spooky hallway, like it's not scary to me because this is just a game and we're going to be done in 2 hours, and you don't have you haven't put a piece of yourself into this player. So John, you're working with House of a Thousand Corpses and Terrifier and all these horror properties. How does that work in terms of player character design?
Yeah, I think that largely, especially with board games and tabletop RPGs, you're going to get out what you put into it. We talked a little bit about playing Blood on the Clock Tower. And one of the best things about that game is it really sings, it hums when everybody has committed to being in it. They are committed to fully putting, any reservations of seeming foolish or silly aside and saying, I'm going to go all in on this. And that's an experience that only lasts an hour and a half, if you're having a good game of it. And so you're dealing with the idea of I'm just going to put my whole self into this. So you can, there are ways that you can love things. You can love something slow and simmering over a long period of time. And then there are things that you can love intensely for a short period of time. And I don't think that one is necessarily better or worse than the other. It's just a different way of approaching that situation. And so for something like, Fright Fights or Grindhouse, which is also a very quick game, these are games you can play in, 20 minutes. But if you're putting yourself in that character's shoes, if you are with a group of players who are all ready to invest the same level of energy and care that you are, you can have a very meaningful story come out of that experience. Sometimes just as rewarding or just as relatable as you would if you've been playing a character for a long time.
Great answer.
I
Casey?
just want to add one thing real quick, because that was awesome way of putting it. And it made me think it's really about immersion, right? It's like when you watch a horror movie, you didn't create those characters, but you're getting immersed in the story. And that goes to show the importance of good writing in games, right? Where you're given these characters, but if the game is written well, if the players are invested, as John mentioned, then you are immersed in it, whether it's 20 minutes or an hour, right? And that kind of gives you that feeling of involvement and makes the stakes higher, even if you didn't spend any time creating that character.
I want to step in.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
absolutely
Jump on it.
agree. It's the writing. Like when you go to see a movie, if there's a well-written scene, in one scene, you care about a character. You care about what happens to them, what they want, what's going to happen to them. And that's the challenge in a game as well. It's like you've got a small amount of time. In that few minutes, can you write something that's going to make people connect to that character and care about what happens to them? And it can be done in a very short amount of time, but obviously games that you put more energy into, like you were saying before, that's a long-term investment, and the fear goes up. Like when you play a Call of Cthulhu campaign, those characters are going downhill, or there's no getting out unscathed. It's just not on the cards. So either they're going to die horribly or they're going to go insane, and that's inevitable. So it's that connection that you make to that character, and that you want them to last as long as they can, but you know that it is a finite amount of time. I think that's another important thing with horror, is that they are vulnerable, and that you can connect to that vulnerability, and that is, again, in the writing.
So, Chris, in your forthcoming system, it's based on weird fiction, sci-fi. Is it also horror?
Yeah, yes.
So I imagine someone who sits down to play a horror game is no stranger to sci-fi or weird fiction. It might just be up for whatever. But when you are blending or crossing genres like that, how do you get buy-in? Because sitting down to play, a horror game might be different from sitting down to play like a Star Trek game.
For sure. Yeah. And I think it's important to set expectations in the beginning of your game so that all the people sitting down know what type of game it's going to be. And with our game, a lot of that is in the characters and the setting. We have a prelude in the game where you choose the characters and the settings described, because it's different every time you play it. And it's very short and brief, but it still paints that picture of what type of story this is going to be. Is it going to be a horror, science fiction? You'll be able to tell that in the first few minutes of the game. And then with that, hopefully begin to collectively tell that story together that you want to tell. Obviously, players in all role-playing games are going to do whatever they're going to do. You can't really control them, and that's part of the fun of it. Is it's supposed to be a horror game, but then somebody befriends the weird store owner, and now you're getting drinks with him instead of like exploring it's like what's going on here. But that's what the players want to do, so that's what is going to happen in this particular story. But taking those connections that they make and then being able to subvert them or twist them in ways that are narratively interesting, that's the challenge of any role-playing game. And that you can try and write that in your adventures as much as until the cows come home, but you need experience as a GM to be able to know how to navigate those things and keep things on track, keep a mood, and tell that particular type of story.
Is it important that for a game like yours that players are familiar with the tropes and conventions of the genre they're playing?
It's not necessary. It helps a lot, and we try and paint broader strokes so that there are tropes that are in stories that people can pick up on and then play into those tropes, because those are cultural touchstones that people know. However, I've watched my wife run it, who's not a gamer or into science fiction or fantasy. She's run it with her 73-year-old aunt, her two cousins that are in their 30s, and my 11-year-old son. And they played a story where they were a suburban family that were actually aliens pretending to be humans that were recently uncovered, and they were trying to keep the lid on everything. And just watching them play it, that's a vague enough thing that there's like Third Rock from the Sun and Alf, like any of these things. There are these little things that people pick up on like subconsciously, and they're able to tie that into the story. And we saw them do that. And even a 77 or 73-year-old English woman from Yorkshire was able to jump in on it and knew what she was doing. So I think that that's important to make it grounded in a way that people can connect. It's the empathizing, and that's the buy-in. If people can go, I understand who this person is, and I care about what happens to them and what they want. And I think that in any storytelling, that's the most important thing.
Nicely said. Casey, I want to talk about world building in fiction and how important that is for a good adaptation for a game or a movie or anything like that versus this character-centric mode, because we all want characters, but it's hard to base a game on a character.
Yeah, I think world building gets at that immersion, right? Whether it's a book or a game. So that entails like the setting, right? Really being able to see it, to feel it, smell it, whatever it is, both in books and games. I would say for my books, the Western series, the Old West is a very specific aesthetic that everybody has some sort of imagery of, right? So there's a little bit of a shortcut there. My challenge as a writer was to make it fresh and make it my own version, right? So in my Weird West world, there are no cities as we know it, history as we know it. It's almost like an alternative version of our Old West. From there, I was able to introduce monsters and towns and kind of all of these fantastical things while also drawing on Western tropes, like very mindfully, right? We have the hats and the dusters, and it's also an interesting balance with, the Hollywood version of the Old West and the historic version of the Old West. And I love kind of learning the differences, right? One quick example, the scene in an Old West movie where they burst through the salon and the swinging doors open. And it turns out swinging doors were not really a thing. Like most saloons had just a normal door, but we always picture the swinging doors, right? So in my books, even though it's alternate history, I do try to use accurate details. And then for the game, selecting exactly what details made sense to include, right? Whether it's the sense of dust in the air, or again, certain smells or certain drinks they would drink. Incorporating those details very mindfully, I think, is helpful in terms of fleshing out that world around the characters.
Emma, so you're a GM and a player. Mm-hmm. What are certain game worlds that you feel drawn to?
I mean, so I do really love the Cthulhu games. And so I love cosmic horror. So that's always going to be something. Sorry, my daughter's in the back.
Crab walking backwards. Not creepy at all.
That's always something I'm drawn to. But actually, I really, really like Gothic settings too. So I'm always looking for that. That's something that I actually did like whenever I made my own campaigns, and even more so than like Ravenloft, is like just very truly Gothic. I think that that's a great setting for horror, and it really helps. I think players are familiar with it in a way, like already, even if you're not big into horror, which not everyone that I play with is. And so I think that that's just a nice creepy place to start.
I did a panel on Gothic, and I had like 5 authors on, and we all tried to describe Gothic, and we just we could have talked for an hour just being like everything that Gothic is. And I was like, well, let's talk about what Gothic isn't. I think that's a smaller pool. And that sounds like such a fun setting and pool of tropes to pull from for game design. John, do you do anything in the Gothic, or is it all hack and slash?
No,
Splasher.
as you kind of said, Gothic can mean a lot of things. I think that, somebody had said the other day, I have a book out that's I call it's cozy horror, and people say, what's the difference between like a cozy horror and an overt horror, which I think it kind of ties into the idea of Gothic, because as you said, it's sort of what isn't in it. And so I kind of always describe Alien versus Aliens as the two differences, and I think that this can work for Gothic as well. We'll see if I can land this comparison, but Alien is all about the scene and setting. It's about the creeping dread that's around the corner. It's saying we're in this creepy castle, this haunted house. In Alien, it's a spaceship, but there's something that's down the corridor and around, and we're walking down this corridor and we're trying to figure out what it is. What is scaring us so much that's down at the other end of this? Whereas the overt horror of Aliens is there are a dozen aliens down this corridor. They're coming at us right now, and we have to deal with it. And once we've dealt with one of them, we have to deal with another one. And so I think for me, Gothic very much plays into the first setting there. It's what is down there. I am feeling dread because something scary is coming. Whereas non-Gothic is a little more in your face. I don't know if that made sense at all.
I love that comparison. We're often talking about Ripley as like the ultimate final girl, and is the xenomorph technically a slasher, set in space? Because there's, in terms of ciphers, a silent masked killer with a edged weapon and the xenomorph, they're kind of similar. Chris, I saw your eyes light up. I saw the twinkle when we started talking about Alien versus Aliens.
Well, I think one of the things about Alien, the first one, is that it's about a systemic problem. Like the alien itself is just an animal, like ultimately. But what the real problem is the corruption inside. It's ash. It's this, where Ripley was like, no, we can't bring him on. He's contaminated. We got rules for this. And then they break the rules. They do the things they're not supposed to do. She doesn't, but the rest of the crew does. And I think that says more about the way that things are set up, and that there's this rot from inside, which is a lot of Gothic horror. I mean, like look, Fall House of Usher and all the classics. It's about the rot. That there's something inside and it's falling apart, and then this thing kicks it off, and then it all just disassembles. And I think that's one of the great things that, and I agree with you that Alien is Gothic in even though it's in space, it's totally a Gothic thing. Whereas Aliens is, I'd almost say, an adventure film, just dark, like that there's so much death and destruction that goes on in that thing. But I think that was something I hadn't really connected. In my mind, I've connected the Gothicness of Alien, but once you said it, was like something clicked for me, and I was like, absolutely, totally.
Yeah, you can keep running down that train of thought. For me, the fact that the xenomorph actually looks like part of the ship just shows you that it's just an element of the setting. And when it gets you, it converts you into this bioorganic machinery that just looks like part of the ship. So it is that it's the system. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about today. Let's talk about games. It's so funny. You just bring up Alien to a bunch of nerds, how quickly we get derailed. They're classics for a reason, folks.
I wish I could say this was the first time that bringing up Alien has derailed a conversation, but it seems to happen a lot.
Definitely on this show. So, John, I want to talk about the current landscape of games. What's going on? What if we went to the Walmart gaming aisle, for example, what might we expect to find? What's on offer, but then also I want to talk about the crowdfunding aspect of this industry. So
So I have a very good answer for this, but it's a really upsetting topic. What's hot right now are card games. Card games are everything. If you look at crowdfunding, the Cyberpunk card game raised $20 million. It's the highest game in history. It beat out Frostpunk, which was, I think, about 10 million. Which was a very minis heavy game. In the history of crowdfunding and really popular high selling games are hobby games, games that have a lot of miniatures, games that feel like they have a lot of value, games that come in a box that is larger than a small child. But what's happened, and we've seen a very hard pivot, and I think that, again, the Cyberpunk Kickstarter really sells and it shows this, is that we made a hard pivot into smaller, contained, lighter weight card games. And unfortunately, the reason for this is almost entirely tariffs. It's become almost impossible to make money making a game that is large and heavy and requires actual manufacturing outside of the US. And it's a logistical nightmare right now. And so, yeah, that is the upsetting reason why the world right now is card games, or at least in the US. Card games is everything.
That is a good answer, and very enlightening. I don't know if we would have been able to chase that down on our own. I've definitely read some stuff about tariffs and sort of slim, low-cost game manuals suddenly getting held up for months because of tariffs or costing, an insane amount of money. Casey, you've got a card game. Was this just a happy accident because your husband has been developing card games?
A happy accident. We also hit some obstacles with the tariffs, but Jason's intention with the game was to develop something like fast and easy to play. So counter to Doomtown, which is a whole big box, a lot of setup, a pretty steep learning curve. This game, it's really Texas Hold'em with a twist. So each card has an ability. You can choose to attack your opponents or like build up your hand. So his intention was something very easy, portable, quick party game you could play kind of while you wait for other friends to gather for the bigger card game, right? Which is sort of how Magic the Gathering started. So that worked out well in terms of having a card game when the timing is right. That said, we've had a lot of delays, right? Our publisher was going to go with the Kickstarter, and then tariffs happened, and a lot of people lost faith in kickstarting a little bit, and there were some other issues, so we had to pivot from that. Now we're going to do a smaller batch direct sales, about 1,000, and then probably launch a more deluxe version later on. But I didn't realize how flexible you have to be in this industry, like even more so than book publishing. There just been a lot of changes, and maybe we came in at maybe not the best time, just in terms of all the shifts. And yeah, I think it sounds like everybody was affected by tariffs, and luckily we were able to pivot back from that, but it has been challenging.
Chris, you've been involved in many, many Kickstarter campaigns. You've seen how crowdfunding works. What has been your thoughts as you approach this new project?
I still think that there's a lot of merit to crowdfunding, specifically because you can take an idea and see if it has legs and interest, which saves you a lot of work. Back before crowdfunding was a thing, I've knew people that designed games that were really psyched about it, and just nobody was particularly interested in it, even though they spent tons of money and time and effort into it. With crowdfunding, there's a bit of a meritocracy in the fact that, like, are people interested in this? And people say yes, and they are able to make it happen. And I think that's great. And I think that's why the model is stuck around. And I think that's why so many game companies use it, because everything's a gamble, and it mitigates that risk. Because, like, I know I'm a fan of Free League's role-playing games, speaking of Alien, and they've got the Invincible role-playing game that's coming out, where they float these ideas over in a crowdfunding sphere and see, like, well, how many people are actually interested in a Walking Dead role-playing game? And then they find out right away before that they've invested, all this time and energy into it. So I think that that's really still viable. And for me personally, we're moving from a podcast audience to a role-playing game audience, and there is crossover. but not as much as you might think that there is. There's a lot of people that just don't do games. So crowdfunding, I think, is perfect for this, where you can go in and say, well, how many people are actually interested in a game that we would produce? And we're trying to add a few bells and whistles to make it interesting for gamers. One of the big draws that I think that I haven't seen before and that we're offering is that we're going to do a podcast for each adventure, which is game prep. So the idea is that instead of sitting and reading a whole adventure before you get started, you can listen to this podcast that's 30 minutes long that will prep you for the game on your drive back home from work, on the bus, whatever. And I haven't seen that. And I think that's would be really valuable to a lot of people. And in that prep, you can also talk about things like playtesting and what happened and things that we had to deal with. You have a little bit more space to be able to explore those things. That's an idea that we're going to see if that holds legs in crowdfunding, because we'll throw that out there and people are going to say, that's cool, I want in on that, or they're going to go, nah, not my thing, and we'll find out pretty quick.
Oh my God, I really want that though.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. Yeah. I'm surprised nobody's done it.
Strengths, yeah.
I'm surprised.
Emma, do you play D&D in person or over Zoom?
So now I'm playing over Zoom because I moved, but I played in person for years and years. So, and some of my other games I've played in person as well. Like, and I think it's more fun in person, to be honest. Like, you can make it work over Zoom. You can use like Roll20 or like D&D Beyond or all kinds of things, but especially like with more niche games. Like, I do have some really like indie published horror RPG games, and that's like almost impossible to try and get everybody figure it out and stuff if they're not in the same room.
Do you find these indie games just at the game shop or at a gaming aisle of Target, or are you looking at the Kickstarters and the GoFundMes and things like that? Where do you discover new games?
Oh, I definitely have kickstarted many a game that hasn't even been made yet. Like, I hope eventually, because I find out a lot of it through like word of mouth. I'm friends with a lot of nerds, and so we all love to talk about that. And so like things like Reddit, and Kickstarters and stuff, and like also like I really love Hollow Press and all the books they put out, and they put out a lot of RPG games too. And so that tends to be something that I will buy, like all of them.
Nice.
But never really just at the game store or anything. I like to go to game stores, but I don't know. It's not going to be how I'm going to buy a game personally. I want to know someone who knows about it usually and can sell me on it and why it's fun versus like just it looks cool.
John, are you leaning into these recognizable characters and properties to try to get over that hump?
I think that it's a half column A, half column B. In gaming, you're always going to push a lot of copies of games to IP fans. But what I've found, and especially within the horror space, people who are IP fans, licensed fans, are not necessarily gamers. So, I had a Black Christmas game. I had a basket case game. I would be surprised if 50% of the people that bought those ever even opened them. They buy the games because they like the license. They want to have, the things that come with it. The Black Christmas game, for instance, comes with a player piece that is a little glass unicorn that, he stabs Barb with in the movie. And people went nuts in the comments of that Kickstarter campaign because they wanted that little toy. And I was like, that's great. There's also a game in this box as well. When you're doing a non-IP, when you're doing an original game like Grindhouse, which is, about to go into its third season, we're going to have 22 expansions out by this point. People want that game because they like the game. They want to play games. They're actively seeking out something that they can do with their friends that they're passionate about and enjoy. And so there's two sides to that, sort of portion of the industry. And I found the Venn diagram of horror fans who are gamers versus gamers who are horror fans is very different.
That is an excellent distinction. You just made me wonder, there's a value proposition with expansions, or in video games, it's DLC. It's like, okay, I'm going to shell out once for a thing, but I kind of would like to know that there are plans for lots more goodies that I can get. Once I go through the switching cost of investing in this new rule set or IP or a bunch of miniatures or something like that, definitely with card games, it's like, I want more and more and more expansions. Does that change the way that you look at what games to develop? Because not all games lend themselves to endless iteration and expansion.
I would say no. I think if a game finds an audience and that audience is clamoring for more content, then that's amazing. And we're always happy to do that. But, I don't ever go into a project with the expectation that it's going to even find its audience. You go in and you want to do the best job you can. You hope for sun, but you plan for rain. So I always am just pleasantly surprised when a game takes off, because there are so many, and Christina's talked on this and you've mentioned this, there are so many ways that a game can fall apart. There are so many ways that a game can fail to reach its audience. And sometimes it has nothing to do with you. Sometimes it has nothing to do with the publisher. Sometimes it's just bad luck, or it's a busy day on the crowdfunding page and your project gets overshadowed by something else and you just don't find your footing. And that happens a lot. So I don't ever plan to be making more content for a game, but there are things that come up in the design process where you're always making cuts. You're always deciding, is this going to make it into the final game? And if it doesn't, then you kind of put that in its own little section of the document that you can come back to if the time comes that there is a demand to make more content for that.
And then another question that popped up for me, working with these IP holders and these publishers for things like House of a Thousand Corpses or Terrifier, is there anything that say like, no, we're not going to go there, these are certain lines you can't cross? Do they ever pull back on that? Oh yeah.
Yeah, it happens a lot. It's a little bit of a difficult subject to give examples on because of legal reasons, but there are certain IP holders, there are certain licensors who they don't have a specific idea of what they want, but when you show them what you've made, they have very specific ideas of what they don't want. And they don't tell you that when you start working. And so you learn how finicky a publisher or a licensor is going to be without going too deep into details. And I've had this experience myself multiple times, and I have a lot of friends who have dealt with this because they just have very, very specific ideas of what they don't like, and they are only willing to tell you once you've already turned in what feels like a finished product.
That doesn't sound like there's any trauma there to be mined.
None at all.
Chris, your game is going to operate on this wealth of weird fiction and strange tales, a lot of which is now in the public domain. Are you name checking some of those dead authors?
Not really. We're sticking away from that most. I think that in the final writing, there's mention of some of the writers that have inspired the game, but the game is a lot more about our show and the work. It's sort of the work through our show, which is, if I know you're familiar, Jeff, you've been on the show, but for people that aren't familiar with the show, it's myself and my friend Chad that are the co-hosts, and we've known each other since we were like 13 years old, and we have very similar interests, and we have backgrounds in entertainment, so we discuss these things like old friends, and we try and find what's funny in a lot of these things. And I think that comes naturally in role-playing games where people want to have fun. You're there to have fun. So even if a game is horror, there are elements of levity. And I think, of course, that's necessary in any horror. If you don't have those peaks and those valleys, you're not going to get as low or as high if you just kind of keep it at one tone. So there's a lot of us in these adventures that we're doing, but they are definitely inspired by the source material. And we mention that, but one of the adventures is you play barbarians from a Conan-esque world that end up in 1980s Los Angeles, which is nothing to do with the literature that we covered from the early 20th century, late 19th century, but it has a lot to do with the type of media that we consumed growing up, where it was cheap to shoot in Los Angeles and just put some people in barbarian costumes and do the thing. But there's something about those types of stories that tap into that it's a cross between those things. I think that there's a strength in mentioning that because people can connect to something that they already know. But doing a show about Lovecraft and weird fiction, most people don't really know who Lovecraft is. And I know in our world they do. But anytime I would be at any family gathering and I tell people what I do, their eyes, I go, oh, it's, Lovecraft, Arthur Machen, Aldrin. Nobody knows who I'm talking about. They have no idea who that is. And I go, oh, you've heard of Cthulhu? No, what's that? Never mind. Just don't worry about it. So in our world, that means a lot, but outside, and like I said, we're trying to bring people in that don't normally play. It doesn't have as much power as I'd like. So we touch on it, but we move away from it. Yeah.
I got to say, Barbarians in 1980s Los Angeles is a game I would like to get Jumanji'd into. That's that's peak right
Absolutely.
there. Casey, are you, and actually, maybe this you can't talk about it, but are you planning expansions, or do you just, it's all in a document somewhere and you just have to wait and see?
We are planning an expansion. My husband is obsessed with games, so he already has like grand plans for the expansion and the deluxe edition. And when John was talking about sort of like, how much you plan for the expansion, it made me think of book writing, actually, because when I write a book, I'm not necessarily planning to expand, but I always leave room for expansion. And I think a lot of writers do this, right? You have interesting little tidbits in a story where you say, okay, I could expand on that later. I could spin that out into a different book or a sequel. So with this game, at least, that is sort of our mindset. Like, okay, we have a lot of ideas. Here's kind of the specific ideas for, the expansion, which will be in the, if all goes well, the deluxe edition that goes to Kickstarter. It's fun to think of ways, right, to spin off and not exactly tied to like the game expansion, but I also have a specific story in mind I want to write for the game, right? Because the scenario is you're gathering your cards in this game of poker, and each card is a different character. So I have in my head that I would like to write a story where all these gunslingers and various people come together to fight this big monster in the town square. So that would be like a special story that is part of the expansion. So just thinking in, ways to build on that universe and, fun aspects that people who enjoy the game would probably appreciate. So we'll see who can say, but yes, we have it in mind. Hopefully it comes to be someday.
Since we have this brain trust here, I would love to put together some actionable information for people that might be listening who are horror writers and would like to develop games, or who are developing games and would like to know about marketing or game design mechanics. Obviously, we can't touch on all of it, but if there's anything from your experience that sort of stands out, like, oh, this was a surprise to me, I wish more people knew X about developing games from horror fiction. So we're going to start with John.
Sure. So I have a lot of background in IP work and licensed products, and I get questions a lot from people who want to get into not just game design, but specifically into licensed game design. And so they always ask me, I've made a game and it's in the world of Dark Shadows. How do I get the Dark Shadows game made? The answer is, unfortunately, you don't. If you try to build a game that's in a specific license on spec, it's not going to go great unless it's like open license, or you have the company that specifically really wants that thing. And even then it's dicey. More often than not, it's better to make a game that is inspired by a universe And then when you pitch it, you can say, hey, by the way, this game is inspired by, Dark Shadows. I think that it would, if you had something like a Dark Shadows or an Addams Family or a Munsters type of license, this might be a good fit. And then it puts it onto the licensor to say, hey, okay, let's look into whether or not this is going to fit in a license or not. It's a question I get all the time, and yeah, I'm always sad to break somebody's heart and say, don't do that. Make it license free, and then hope that a license comes into it.
But isn't the razor's edge you're walking there is you want to make something that is clearly influenced by or inspired by an IP, but also legally distinct, so that they can't be like, no, we'll just sue you because that's way too similar.
Yeah, I mean, I think a great example is like the Final Girl series of board games, which are all so clearly wearing their influences on their sleeve, but they are their own thing. They're not in those worlds, which also, another part of it is also worth noting if you're making things with licenses. The licensor is going to take a large portion of the profit. So if you actually want to make money, sometimes it's better to go license free anyways, because then you have a much larger share of that pie for yourself.
Chris?
I have yet to complete a game, so I'm not exactly sure if I could advise anybody on how it works, and I'll be able to tell you in about 6 months' time.
Well, that will be the proof in the pudding, but just in your experience of working on Cults of Cthulhu and now this other game, were there any stumbling blocks or obstacles that you struggled with that you found a way around or through, and you're like, hey, this works? Like, there is some efficacy to this way of designing a game.
Yeah, well, play testing. There was a lot of play testing, and that really helps you figure out what's wrong and what doesn't work and what you want to get across, what types of games you want to do. And I mean, we've been play testing for a couple years now. Not full time, obviously, because we've got our show as a primary thing, but it's in those play tests that you're able to see not only what doesn't work, but wait a minute, why am I doing this particular thing? What do I want out of this? And what are we trying to do? And be able to hone that vision and that product that you've got, because a game is a product and you want people to buy it and to have fun with it. And playtesting is the way to find out whether the game is fun and people are going to want to buy it or not. So I think that if I was going to give anybody advice on potentially making a game, is just playtest the heck out of it and see if it works. And if not just you're having fun with it, other people people that aren't like you, people that aren't interested in the one specific thing that you're into. I mean, of course you can come up with a game that's very niche, but that's going to limit your audience and also your potential of making money. So
I would echo that for sure. Like, the play testing, being new to this world, I didn't realize how much play testing is necessary, right? Like, it is so much more than I think most people assume it is, right? And it's with different groups, different numbers, different configurations. But for me, the parallel is like for books beta reading, right? You're getting your early feedback before publication, and you have to have some level of being flexible and adaptable, right? Like, when you have your beta readers reading your book, if everybody's saying, oh, this chapter's not working, even if you love the chapter, you have to like face it and accept it. Same with gaming, right? If everyone is stumbling over a specific card or instruction, even if you love that mechanic, clearly it's not working, and you have to, be professional and make the change. So I would echo playtesting, and then just remember that it is a business like everything else, right? Like, there's a lot of passion there, but you have to be professional. You have to assume rejection and failure. That is part of, creative work. And that's fine. That's just the way it is. But as much as, you're passionate about the project, you also have to be collaborative and adaptable for success.
Emma, when you're doing your homebrews, do you just port the rule set from one to the other? Are these just mutations on certain open licenses? What's your approach?
So I totally get what you guys are saying about playtesting, even though I'm not in the gaming industry, because I have seen things go way off the rails in my own homebrewed things, especially things that, did not port super well. Like, because I have basically created almost brand new games, like, because of what I wanted to specifically do. And then, you don't predict how people are going to and play the game, and it's like, wow, you really just don't think exactly like me, do you? Why are you doing all this crazy stuff, especially in role-playing games where it's much more open, and so they kind of go wherever they want with it. And so I mean, I think that actually makes a lot of sense and makes me kind of more interest actually in maybe making a game someday, because I'm like, oh, I've actually done that. I'm kind of familiar with this.
Nice. The last question to close it all out, Casey, where do you want to see the games industry go in terms of horror games and horror fiction being adapted into games?
I love the I think emphasis and growth of the indie space, like both in publishing and gaming, right? Because it gives you so much room to experiment and have like really wacky ideas, both in games and books, that would not necessarily make it with a big publisher. So I would love to continue to see more kind of indie horror games and experimental games. And there's a ton out there already. Like, I think we're in a very good time for gaming, at least as far as being a player, right? We have so many games at home that we haven't gotten to that I am very excited to play. It's almost like an embarrassment of riches, which is great. And I hope we continue to see that, especially in the horror space.
Chris, you're a minis guy. Where do you want to see the future of games going?
Well, one of the big things that I hope for is that there's going to be a wider acceptance of non-Dungeons and Dragons role-playing games. I was watching, Bob the World Builder, he's a YouTuber, and he did a big survey about role-playing games. And it's something like ridiculous. 80% of people play either Dungeons and Dragons, some version of it, Pathfinder, or an OSR game. So and if you look at all the actual play stuff, it's mostly Dungeons and Dragons or those types of things. And what I'd like to see is more science fiction games, more horror games, where go into it's slowly happening. At Call of Cthulhu, I know that there's been some pretty spectacular live play things that they've done, but still the sales numbers are it's D&D, it's fantasy D&D stuff, which as I've said at the beginning, it's not my favorite game, even though I run it because that's what people want. People want D&D. And that was the whole reason I started playing it. Was my barber was like, I want to play Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm like, oh, well, it's all right. But there's this other game called Cthulhu. No, Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, we're playing.
You had a pair of scissors up to your face and you're like, oh yeah, D&D. I'll run D&D.
But yeah, in the game industry, specifically tabletop role-playing game, I want to see D&D and fantasy D20 games pushed to 20%. That would be great. And let's see all these other great rule systems, great settings, great stuff get more of the limelight.
Emma, how about you? What do you want to see from the game space?
I agree. I want to see more in the indie industry, because that is like where I found some of the coolest, most unique games. And I get that that's not where the most money is, but it's where you can really be creative. And as a player, where I found some of the coolest stuff, especially for horror, I feel like horror just thrives in indie spaces because a lot of people want to play, like D&D, like a basic game, and it's just never going to be as big of an audience. So I feel like indie is kind of the space for that, because you can find those people that want to play this really weird with like super crazy mechanics, and it's like nothing you've ever played before. And that's just like, it's a treasure to find those things, because they are so unique and so cool. And so, but I get it, those people are not necessarily making as much money as they should, and so I'm benefiting and they're not.
So Emma, if you could lob some Hail Mary passes out there, are there any weird horror trends that you think need to become games, like Tradwife horror games or anything like that?
Ooh, I don't know. You know what? Actually, I've kickstarted several like solo games, which I know is not it's like RPGing by yourself, but like I've been really into that when it comes to horror. There's been several that I'm like, that is really creepy. And I'm super excited to play this game because that is how much of a nerd I am.
John, what would you like to see in the future of games?
I would like to see more games bringing in demographics of non-gamers, or at least bringing in awareness of the games industry and how broad it is. I don't have the numbers as of right now because it's gone down significantly over the last couple of years for reasons we've mentioned earlier. But at a certain point, there were over 6,000 board games coming out per year, new board games. You know, when I was a kid, I played a lot of video games, and people would say, you're playing Mario, you're playing on a Nintendo. And it's like, well, it's a PlayStation, but yeah, sure. But nowadays you talk to somebody and they're like, oh yeah, my grandpa plays Red Dead Redemption 2. Or like, yeah, my mom loves Skyrim. Everybody has accepted that the video games is not just like, oh, you've got a Nintendo there, huh? And I'd love to see board games get to that same space, because when I talk to a lot of people, kind of what Chris was saying earlier about Lovecraft, the majority of people I meet on the street, when they say, what do you do? And I say, I make board games. They go, oh, what, like Monopoly? It's like, well, not really, not quite. It's a much bigger world than Monopoly and Yahtzee. That's not what the board games industry is, and that's not what the hobby is. And there's more than likely a game out there that's for that person, that person would love to play and might be a great stepping stone to get them into the hobby in whatever form that takes. There's something for everyone in board games and in TTRPGs, and just not a lot of people realize that yet. And so I'm kind of waiting for the game or games that comes along that makes people realize that, you know, it's not just a Nintendo. There's more out there.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us and talking about horror fiction and how it mutates into games. Casey, where can people find you and, more importantly, your projects online?
Yes, I'm on pretty much all the socials at Casey Grifant, at KCGRIFANT, and also my website, caseygriffant.com, on social media more than I should be. So you can find me there.
And is there a pre-order link or anything you can toss out?
Hopefully very soon there is a sign up. And for people who sign up on our mailing list to get notified, they will get either a discount or a freebie. So I definitely recommend signing up. And actually they can do that at monstergunslingers.com.
Perfect. Emma, where can we find you online?
You can find out about all of my books and order them or pre-order them from various places on emmaemurray.com. And I'm also on Instagram, EmmaEMurray_, because there was apparently already an Emma E.
And what's that next project you mentioned?
So I have Decay Chain, which is about an aspiring family annihilator. And it's a novel. It has nothing to do with games. Sorry, guys. But it comes out in April from Ghoulish. And so definitely you can pre-order it now, and then you'll get surprised with a book in like a year and be like, oh yeah, this is awesome.
For my big aspiring family annihilator audience, that's most of them, folks. John, where can we find you online?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram and Facebook at John Cohn Author. My website is www.johncohnauthor.com. You can learn about season 3 of Grindhouse. It's got a page on GameFound. I think you just can search Grindhouse. Fright Fights is from Fright Rags. You can go to frightrags.com to learn more about that. And hey, I'll talk about a book too. I've got a book coming out in August called Rituals of the Night. It's book 1 of a YA urban fantasy horror series. And that's coming from Crystal Lake Publishing.
Fantastic. Mr. Lackey.
Yeah, you can find my podcast at strangestudies.com, but the game is going to be, or it's on BackerKit right now. You can get signed up for the pre-launch, and that there's a link. If you go to strangestoriesthegame.com, that'll take you straight to the BackerKit. You can sign up, and we're launching in July, mid-July.
I am so excited for all your projects and your books. Like John said, this is a space that runs on passion. One of the best things you can do is run into somebody who has an idea for a game or who's in the trenches developing a game, because they've just spent so much time thinking about it and iterating, and there's so much wild creativity and focus that goes into it that game designers and writers are the best people. Maybe I'm biased, but again, I'm talking to an audience of aspiring family annihilators, so what do I know?
Thanks for listening. Links are in the show notes. Please subscribe and follow. You can find me at jeffccarter.com and pick up my collection, We Bleed Orange and Black, 31 fun-sized tales for Halloween. Until next time, stay spooktacular.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.